Virginia, I hear you tell many stories about mothers and brothers, and always wrapped around the edges is your father. So I would like to hear you talk about who your father was in your life.
That calls for it's a complicated question, and it would be a complicated answer, but I will try to be concise. My father was born of Danish immigrant parents on the plains of northwestern North Dakota.
What year do you know?
It would be about 1907. On a homestead. And he had two older sisters, a younger sister, and two younger brothers. And one of the brothers, Abner, died of a burst appendix, I think, when he was 8. And out there, I think that was a death sentence if they had an appendicitis. But anyway, my dad developed something which turned out to be St. Vitus dance. It's a nerve jerky thing. Maybe it's like Tourette's syndrome. And I don't know if he would spout words that he hadn't intended to say or not. I don't know. But I know that he grimaced a lot. And he only went to school through the 5th grade because he was more or less withdrawn from school because the teacher maintained that he was making faces at her and was being insolent and that he wouldn't sit still, and she put him in the corner a lot. And then she slapped his face too. And so did Grandma, his mother, slap his face and punish him for being disrespectful, making faces and jerking around, not sitting still. He learned from his two older sisters, Lillian and Marie, what they were learning in school. So he was very literate, and he had a beautiful handwriting once he outgrew a lot of the tremors and jerks. And when he became an adult and he moved into town, he smoked. He did all the things that his pious religious parents forbade and thought were punishable by hell. And he drank, and he became an alcoholic. I don't know if he was alcoholic by the time he met and married my mother, who was from Iowa. He was from a very outgoing, merry, joyous, dirt poor, large family, 9 kids. But he brought his bride back up to North Dakota. That was a wasteland to her, I'm sure. And then he became an absent husband weekends, which is when he did his drinking. And he did it away from the house. So he was an absent father. He was not home drunk, sleeping or creating havoc. He was just not there. And she had to cover for him. A lot of times weekends Sundays when there would be a family dinner, he would be a no-show. I don't know how she covered, but her sisters-in-law, spoke very highly of her and how hard it was for her. They didn't realize at the time. Now she would be called probably an enabler. Anyway, when his wife, my mother, died very suddenly of a stroke at age 38, he was 35. That was his wake-up call. And I think he felt instantly very guilty for having a dependency on alcohol and having been so much an absent husband and father. He had maybe an experience like Saul, who was persecuting Christians in the New Testament, until he was struck while he was on his high horse, and he fell off his horse and was blind for 3 days and had an encounter with the living Christ, and it changed the rest of his life. Well, my father had a similar experience. I don't know what the figurative horse was that he fell off of, but he stopped drinking. But he realized he couldn't expect that or his drinking buddies couldn't expect that they would be unhooked from their dependency the way he was. So he got on a train and went to Minneapolis and met with one of the co-founders, I think it was Bill, of AA. And he got the gospel, and he brought the gospel of AA back to North Dakota, started the first AA group in our little town of Kenmare. He had a lot of candidates, potential members to choose from, and it was very successful. His drinking buddies, they all rallied. I think they all realized that they could be better off and their families could be better off. And so by the time he met Virginia Halverson and married her, he had been sober for 3.5 years. And he continued to start AA groups in our region of North Dakota, and he went even into Montana. And I'm not sure about South Dakota. I mean, we were closer to Canada than to South Dakota. But he did a lot as a public servant. He had been quite wealthy as a feed and grain dealer. He had elevators, cleaned and stored grain and bought and sold. He did very well, even bought a little airplane. And then he was a two-session legislator, a representative from our county at the legislature in Bismarck. He was a legislator when he remarried. And then one of the things he did as a legislator, he sponsored a bill creating the first treatment program, because up till then alcoholism had been regarded as a sin, a sign of depravity, and you should just get a grip and repent and get on with your life. And my father's position was that alcoholism is a disease, it's an addiction, you have no control over it. You can gain control over it, but you can never expunge it or exterminate it. And he created then the funding from that bill, which passed in the North Dakota legislature, funded the first treatment program at the state hospital. Unfortunately, it was the state hospital, so alcoholism was linked in with mental illness. But that was the best they could do. And then later, he was a great fundraiser. He got enough money to buy a hospital in Mandan across the Missouri from Bismarck, which had closed. It overlooked a different river called the Heart River, so it's called Heartview. And that was a treatment center modeled after Hazelden, which is located north of St. Paul. And it was very successful, doing education, preventative education throughout the state, and treatment of all ages and stages and walks of life, men and women and children. And there was family counseling, and then they expanded not just alcohol but also drugs. And then he became the director of a program which was state funded called the North Dakota Commission on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, which aimed at preventive education and treatment. He also started a summer school at the University of North Dakota. Maybe it's still going, I don't know. It was 1 week every summer. Very well-known speakers would come from all over and speak to students who were drug counselors, school counselors, pastors, psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, doctors, anybody who had anything, social workers, anything to do with alcoholism in whatever form it might touch an individual or a family. I attended it once. I learned so much, I thought I knew everything, but I didn't. So that was my father's life. Speaking, raising money, getting up in the middle of the night to answer a call because an Indian was in jail because he was drunk, or a pastor had been taken to jail because he was intoxicated and driving, or the wife of some prominent man had tried to kill herself because she couldn't stand being an alcoholic, a closet alcoholic anymore. I mean, you name it. He answered many calls like that, and he always was helpful. I think stepmother, mother, had to fend off some of these adoring women who owed their lives or their husbands' lives to his help. But Dad gave his best to the public, and when he came home, he was depleted, and he just wanted to sit in his chair or putter in his garden, depending on the season. And he pretty much just withdrew. And he was kind of old to have 3 more sons after being a dad to me and to Larry, who was 2 years younger than me. I think Dad was just worn out. And then he developed cancer in his late 50s. And he lived several more years and had 2 lung transplants. He had smoked, because his parents regarded smoking as a sin, and he needed to rebel, so that's what set him on the path toward lung cancer. So he died just short of his 64th birthday. But he left a legacy that is thriving to this day in North Dakota and beyond. And his name will forever be linked to alcoholism treatment and rehabilitation. And there's a library at the Heartview Foundation named after him and other things.
So you as a daughter, did you feel like you knew him?
Not really. I knew about him. I think most of the information that I know, that I've just related, has come from other people. He had a nice, dry sense of humor, but we didn't see it as much at home as we did when we were in the audience and he was speaking. And he was very devout. He read his Bible every day. He was very active in our little Lutheran church. And he was just always regarded as a good guy, Bernie Larson. You can always count on Bernie. But I think his children felt a little bit that they got the short end of the stick.
And do you think that you made choices or did things in your life that were a reaction to who your father was?
No, I didn't. I think Larry did, very much so, and I feel sorry for Larry. That's a whole another story if I were to go into what I pieced together as the psychology of my brother. Being a boy, being 2 years younger than I, and losing his mother at age 5. That's another story, and I won't go into it unless later on there's popular demand. But anyway, my father, as he was dying of cancer, he finally forgave himself. We kept saying, Dad, you're so hard on yourself, feeling guilty that you weren't a better father, you weren't a better husband, you weren't a better this or a better that. I said, God has already forgiven you, so your standards are higher than God's. That's pretty presumptuous, don't you think? And he finally got it. So as he was dying, he was healing on the inside in his soul. And by the time he died, all of his family relationships were in good repair.
That's the way to go.
Yeah, that's the way to go.